Vampire Hunter sits neatly as one of the first steps into taking the bullet heaven genre into a bit more of a mashup direction, in this case a first-person shooter. Now, there are some visual similarities to other shooters, especially some roguelite ones, thanks to the guns filling the entire screen. But if you pick this up, it's important to remember the level design is very much inspired by the Survivor-likes rather than the more room-by-room roguelites it will get compared to. This is also reinforced by the game's story, or lack thereof, where it gives you your objective, your tools, and lets you on your way without much to infer about our character, the world they're in, or their purpose outside of, well, killing as many demons, bats, vampires, and undead as possible. It very much follows the philosophy of sending out more bullets than you care to count, and building up the achievements that involve killing over 1 million enemies total, and that is your story. So all that means is we have to fall back on the gameplay itself and the progression to get the most out of this game. Now, we'll get to gameplay in a moment, since the progression is part of what I think will make most people put a pause on this game, since the gameplay itself is simple fun that I don't have much to complain about. But the progression, well, the progression at face value is what you'd expect from a fairly mid-range entry in the Survivor genre. On the most basic level, you have some simple upgrades like damage, reload speed, health, etc. that you get from currency, and you can unlock different starting characters in the form of weapons with that same currency. Beyond that, you have relics you can equip for boosts, but you can only find them randomly in levels or through achievements, and you have zone modifiers you can use to make levels you've already done a bit different than normal, in the form of constellations you choose when entering the level, though it is only possible to use them after beating a level, and you unlock them by mastering specific starting weapons. All of this is pretty straightforward and easy to do. The more difficult thing to do is unlocking new levels to explore, since the difficulty scaling is a bit on the vertical side of things, with the starter level being mind-numbingly easy, though it is called training for a reason, the second level requiring a few unlocks to get to the point of consistently beating, and every level after that scaling hard, and often requiring multiple runs of previous levels to even unlock enough damage upgrades to take out the starter enemies on them, much less later enemies in that level that are tankier. This curve could definitely use a little adjustment, or they could adjust the upgrade it wants you to take for them, which are primarily damage upgrades, so you're not taking 20 bullets to kill a single enemy in a swarm. This needs to get a specific upgrade can be a problem for new players specifically, since there is no indication your damage is lacking until you get into the level, and there's no way to recover already spent money on upgrades, meaning it's grind time. This grind mentality is a bit reinforced since they brought over a feature from cookie clickers in the form of currency-based resets of the save file for even more difficult enemies, should you save up the massive piles of coins to do so. So I can only imagine this vertical scaling gets even tougher in those, but at least in that case you have higher upgrade ceilings and you're an experienced player, so you know that damage is king. The other upgrades you get are tempting, but not as mandatory. Obviously, reload speed helps, health regen is nice, and of course economy boosters that help you level faster or get you gold faster for unlocks will be handy too. Though your gold income will drop off pretty significantly regardless after you finish knocking out the achievement goals, since levels rarely drop more than 3 digits of gold when beaten. Now, hopefully over the course of early access, as the number of levels extend beyond this starting 5, we'll see the enemy durability scaling toned back a bit, so that the levels flow a bit more steady pace, since the ideal goal would be for beating Stage 2 to have you prepared to start working through Stage 3 after a few runs. Then beating Stage 3 would prepare you to start Stage 4, with each run getting you closer to beating Level 4. As it stands, the progression is currently you beat Stage 2, then you farm Stage 2 for a while, until it becomes painfully easy with guaranteed victory, and only then are you prepared to start working your way through Stage 3. I know other games do this as well, but the reality is, at least for me, this starts to seed disinterest in me. By kneecapping progression, it makes me feel like I'm just wasting my time, so a title can say that it has that many more hours of gameplay, since I'm repeating too easy content so that the next stage, the harder content, will be at least reasonable. Now that might be a damning note for some people. For others, that will just come with the territory, and they'll enjoy it as long as the proper gameplay loop is compelling. And for the most part, the gameplay loop is actually good, and it works as a very straightforward pick up and play when you feel like it kind of game. The levels are all reasonable length, with some achievements for beating certain ones in under 5 minutes, while other achievements give you rewards for stretching a level to 15 minutes. To give you an idea of the scope we're talking about time-wise at least. So you won't be spending an entire hour or longer on a single level like some games. Instead, you could beat a few runs during a lunch break and still have time for a sandwich. And the levels do get a bit more complex than the demo would lead you to believe, since in the demo you're pretty much stuck in a long narrow hallway with a boss at the end. But in the full game, you have more complex designs, such as forking paths, various types of traps and tricks, doors you have to shoot open, etc., so that you'll end up taking full advantage of the various movement techs in the game. These movement techs range from basic run and jump kind of stuff that can speed you through a level, though you should remember that running causes way more enemies to spawn, which, while great for your combo meter and drops, can bite you pretty hard if you don't have the firepower to stop it all. Though, thankfully, if you do get overwhelmed, you have a sort of blood-fueled charge that kills enemies in your path over a short distance. But you have to kill enemies to get it to replenish, so it is sort of a last-ditch tool since it doesn't replenish quickly. The jumping specifically will get important from the 3rd level onward, since you'll need to clear deadly traps along the way, since some do stretch the entire span of the hallway, so you have to jump over them. Though I never found it super useful outside of those types of traps, since it doesn't do anything for the enemies. Beyond that, if it wasn't obvious, this game is all about the weapons. Of course, there are a ton. Even if you get a second hand drop, which allows you to fill up an entire second arm with guns, you will not be able to hold all the weapons in the game at once. By default, you can hold 5 guns, 2 passives, and 2 secondary weapons, for a total of 9. With the second arm random drop, it gives you an additional 5 slots for guns to bring you up to 14 total weapons. And before you worry about how you'll see with all of that, the game does give you quite a few display and control options, letting you adjust how these weapons fill the screen. Though be careful or you won't be able to see the ammo counts on a lot of them. It also gives you options on how to use them, from more survivor-like aim assisting, auto shooting, etc. setups to full manual control that has you using both your mouse and keyboard to fire and reload everything to keep it balanced. Personally, I like loading up a ton of weapons with auto fire to save my mouse buttons, and by getting various shot types and reload timers, I can pretty much guarantee I always have at least a couple weapons ready to fire at any given time, including my personal auto grab missiles, since they're the only homing weapon in the game that you can go into your actual hands. That said, I do turn off aim assist since it doesn't put the wear on my system to actually aim at things. As far as a complete weapons list goes, that could be a whole video in and of itself. There's a lot of them. There's multiple straight fire weapons like the rifle, the machine gun, the shotgun, and the pistol, and plenty others. And there's also a wide selection of stream weapons like flamethrowers, lasers, water guns, lightning guns, not to mention lobbing weapons like a blade thrower and a grenade launcher. And this is just the weapons you can equip in your hands proper. Secondaries and auto weapons get even more interesting, with melee choices like a bat and a whip, and also things like sticky bombs if you'd rather have range on your secondaries, and the support skills ranging from a cat that gives you random boosts as you play, to more direct damage options like the homing orbs and lightning strikes. Within a few runs, you will have tried everything most likely though, and chosen your favorites, but since they'll probably add more, there will be a lot of flexibility and diversity here. Though I do wish there was an option to disable or block certain weapons from showing up, just to make the upgrade segments a little bit more reasonable. Now, there are pros and cons to getting a lot of weapons, since, like most Survivor-likes, as you kill enemies, you pick up experience and you get level ups, and these let you select 3 or 4 boons depending on your luck. These range from boosts to the weapons you already have, all the way to new weapons, or if you're extremely lucky, that second arm I mentioned. And it is entirely possible to do the levels with a single super buffed weapon, though due to reload times, there's a reason it is considered more of a challenge and an achievement, rather than a core strategy. You really don't want to be on a reload cycle when being swarmed by a half dozen or more enemies at once. It will be a bad time since you do die quickly in this game. On the other extreme, the problem with too many weapons is you start pulling from way too many boost pools, so you could get a weapon and realistically never see a boost drop for it if you're fully loaded. It's not common, but it can happen. though you can counter this a bit by getting high combo counters by killing enemies in quick succession without getting hit, since that gives you not only more experience drops, but makes them worth more as well, getting you more level ups and more chances at the boost you want. Another thing to keep in mind when choosing your weapon upgrades is actually what weapon you started with, since each weapon has its own boost. The sniper rifle starter, for example, gives you faster reload, while the pistol starter gives you more experience orbs, and each weapon will have these type of effects to boost them during your run. Now, these can be counteracted a bit by constellations, but those are with the purpose of doing just that, making it slightly more interesting or challenging. Does this make the grind between levels less of a chore? A little bit, but it still needs work on smoothing out those regardless. Overall though, I actually really enjoy this game, and the soundtrack is really solid too, so it's worth checking out even if you just want a good soundtrack. And it's worth noting that it is also oddly a first-person game that does not trigger my simulation sickness, and that's without adjusting the field of view and such, though it does include options for those as well, which is nice to have for people who are hypersensitive to it. So, do you like this mashup for survivor likes, or do you prefer sticking to your more traditional overhead ones like the game on screen now? Mention it down below, and if you want to see these reviews ad-free, check out the Patreon linked down below, with plenty of ad-free videos even for non-patrons.